Step inside the hearing room, where Vice President J.D. Vance relies purely on facts and an empty desk to completely dismantle Representative Ilhan Omar's claims. She claimed the Republican Party is the party of fringe extremists who call refugees animals. Ilhan Omar was 9 minutes into her opening statement when she pointed at Vice President J.D. Vance. Vance looked at her the way Marines look at things directly, without expression, without hurry, and waited for her to finish. What you're about to hear is the Vice President of the United States systematically taking down a sitting Congresswoman using nothing but her own public records. Memorized. No notes, no folder, no props. Smash that like button and subscribe. The hearing is about to start. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee convened its hearing on federal fraud prevention, focusing on lessons from the Feeding Our Future investigation at 1000 on a Tuesday morning in March. The hearing room was in the Hart Senate office building. The committee was chaired by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. The Vice President of the United States, exercising his constitutional authority as President of the Senate, had requested to participate. It was an unusual request. It wasn't unprecedented. The chairman had approved it. The committee table was arranged in the standard Senate horseshoe. Senator Rand Paul sat at the center. To his right, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, and Vice President J.D. Vance. To his left, Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada, the ranking Democrat. At the witness table, facing the horseshoe, sat Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. She'd been called to testify about the Feeding Our Future fraud and its connection to her congressional district. Beside her sat Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, who'd come as her guest. Rand Paul called the hearing to order. This hearing of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee will come to order. Today, we examine federal fraud prevention, with a specific focus on the Feeding Our Future investigation in Minnesota. Congresswoman Omar. You recognized for an opening statement. Omar stood up. She didn't need to stand. She stood because standing is what Ilhan Omar does when she wants the cameras to see her. Thank you, Chairman Paul. Before I address the so-called investigation that this committee is using as a pretext to criminalize the Somali American community in my district, I want to say something to the American people about what's really happening in this hearing room today. Her voice carried the sharp, rhythmic cadence that had made her famous, the directness of a woman who learned English as her second language and had turned its bluntness into a weapon. Sitting across from me is the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, a man who wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy that made millions of dollars by selling his family's poverty to Netflix, a man who called Donald Trump America as notorious dictator in 2016 and then became his vice president in 2025, a man who called women without children childless cat ladies on national television, and a man who has spent his entire political career pretending to be working class while cashing checks from Peter Thiel, a Silicon Valley billionaire who funded his Senate campaign and bought his political career. She pointed at Vance. The gesture was sharp. J.D. Vance is a fraud. He didn't escape poverty. He monetized it. He's the most successful poverty profiteer in American political history. She turned to face the cameras. And the Republican Party that made him vice president is the party of fringe extremism, the party that banned certain groups from entering this country. The party whose leader, Donald Trump, stood at a rally in my home state of Minnesota and called Somali refugees animals. Animals. That is what the President of the United States called the people I represent. This hearing isn't about fraud prevention, Mr. Chairman. This hearing is about targeting a Muslim congresswoman and the immigrant community she represents. It's about using the actions of a few criminals to smear an entire population of refugees who fled war and famine to build new lives in America. and it's about a Republican Party that sees my community, a community of survivors, and sees criminals instead. Mr. Vice President, don't sit across from me with your empty desk, and your Yale law degree, and your Marine Corps pin, and pretend that this hearing is about accountability. This hearing is about power, and power in the Republican Party has always meant one thing: silencing black and brown voices that refuse to be silenced. Rashida stood and applauded. Several Democratic staffers in the back of the hearing room nodded. Senator Jackie Rosen, the ranking Democrat, didn't applaud. She looked at her notes. Rand Paul turned to Vance. "Mr. Vice President, you may respond." The Vice President's desk was empty. No folder, no notebook, no legal pad, no phone, no water glass. The mahogany surface was bare, except for the microphone and the small brass nameplate that read, "Vice President of the United States, J.D." Vance didn't stand. He looked at Omar for 2 seconds. Then he spoke. "Thank you, Chairman Paul. Congresswoman Omar, I appreciate the opening statement. I'm going to skip the personal attacks and go directly to the subject of this hearing." His voice was flat, not warm, not cold. The voice of a man who decided, before walking into the room, that he wasn't going to waste time on anything that wasn't a fact. "You called my party fringe extremists. I want to note for the record that my wife Usha is the daughter of Indian immigrants. Senator Tim Scott, sitting to my right, is a black man from North Charleston, South Carolina. You've just called both of them, my wife and my colleague, members of an extremist party. I let them decide how they feel about that characterization. You called me a fraud for writing a book about poverty. Every word in that book is true and verifiable. But we aren't here to discuss my book. We're here to discuss $250 million. You called this hearing a pretext to target the Somali community. This hearing was convened by the chairman of this committee to examine a federal criminal investigation that produced 47 indictments and approximately 25 convictions. The investigation was initiated by the Biden administration's Department of Justice. The lead prosecutors were appointed by a Democratic U.S. attorney. The FBI agents who conducted it served under both Republican and Democratic directors. This isn't a partisan investigation, Congresswoman. It's a federal criminal investigation into the largest pandemic fraud case in American history. And the money that was stolen, $250 million, was supposed to feed children. He paused. Let's talk about those children, and let's talk about your donors. Between 2020 and 2022, the Feeding Our Future program in Minnesota distributed federal funds intended to provide free meals to children in poverty. The program was designed to serve communities where child hunger rates exceeded the national average. Your district, Minnesota's 5th, qualified because approximately 23% of the children in your district live below the federal poverty line. Instead of feeding those children, Congresswoman, the money was stolen. According to the Department of Justice, 47 individuals created fraudulent meal sites that either didn't exist or served far fewer children than they claimed. The stolen funds were used to purchase luxury vehicles, waterfront real estate in Minnesota and Kenya, and were transferred through international wire transfers to accounts in several countries. These aren't my accusations, Congresswoman. These are federal indictments. Case numbers are on the DOJ website. Conviction records are in the federal court system. Anyone watching at home can verify every fact I'm about to cite in approximately 90 seconds on a government website. He leaned forward slightly. Now, the connection to you. Your campaign committee, Omar for Congress, received donations from individuals who were subsequently charged and convicted in the Feeding Our Future fraud. These donations are documented in your own FEC quarterly filings. The donor names match the names on the DOJ indictments. The dates of the donations, in several cases, precede the dates of the indictments by less than 12 months. My question is direct, Congresswoman. Did you know at the time you accepted those donations that the donors were under federal investigation for stealing $250 million of children's food money? Omar's hand came down on the table. This is a biased attack on the Somali community. You are using the actions of a handful of criminals to smear an entire immigrant population. Tim Scott's microphone clicked on. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond to that. Tim Scott was 60 years old, the senior Republican senator from South Carolina, and the first black Republican elected to the Senate from a southern state since Reconstruction. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I am Tim Scott. I am a black man from North Charleston, South Carolina. I grew up poor, single-parent household. My mother worked double shifts so I could eat dinner. Nobody on this committee is criminalizing the Somali community, Congresswoman. The Department of Justice, under a Democratic president with Democratic prosecutors, charged 47 specific individuals with specific federal crimes. Those individuals have names. They have case numbers. They have convictions. The Vice President asked you a factual question about whether your campaign received donations from some of those individuals. That is an accounting question. It isn't a racial question, and Congresswoman, as a black man who's been called biased by progressives for 20 years simply for being a Republican, I am asking you to stop using the word biased as a substitute for the word accountable, because every time you do it, you cheapen the word for the people who actually experience discrimination, and some of us in this room have actually experienced it. The hearing room absorbed this. Scott hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't pointed. He delivered the statement the way a man delivers a statement he's been waiting to make for a very long time. Vance continued, without acknowledging Omar's interruption. I'll take the Congresswoman's non-answer as a non-answer, and note it for the record. Let me continue with the specifics, because the American people watching at home deserve specifics. According to federal court records, all of which are public documents, the Feeding Our Future fraud operated through a network of approximately 250 fraudulent meal sites across Minnesota. These sites claim to be serving thousands of meals per day to children in poverty. Federal investigators found that many of these sites either didn't exist at all, they were addresses for empty lots, closed businesses, and in one case, a residential garage, or they served a small fraction of the meals they reported. The money that was supposed to purchase food for children was instead used to purchase the following, and I'm reading from federal indictment summaries, Congresswoman, not from Republican talking points. Luxury vehicles, including a $200,000 Porsche, waterfront real estate in Burnsville and Prior Lake, Minnesota. International wire transfers to Kenya, totaling more than $3 million, and commercial real estate purchases that had no connection to child nutrition whatsoever. I want to be very specific about one number. $250 million is approximately the annual operating budget of the Minneapolis Public Schools Food Services Division. In other words, the amount that was stolen from the Feeding Our Future program is roughly equivalent to 1 full year of school lunches for every public school student in Minneapolis. Congresswoman, you represent these children. Many of them are Somali American. Many of them live below the poverty line. And the money that was supposed to feed them, their turkey sandwiches, their milk cartons, their apples, was diverted into Porsches and waterfront real estate, while they went hungry. My question remains, did you know at the time your campaign accepted donations from individuals who are now convicted of this crime that those individuals were under federal investigation. Omar didn't answer. She looked at Tlaib. Tlaib didn't look back. I'll note the second consecutive non-answer for the record. Moving on. The wealth. If you were still listening, Tim Scott just told a sitting congresswoman to stop using the word biased as a substitute for accountable. And Vance hasn't even gotten to the $30 million yet. Or the husband? Or the brother? Hit that like button and comment food money if you see where this is going. Congresswoman, I want to discuss your household finances. Specifically, I want to discuss a 600-fold increase in 12 months. According to your 2023 financial disclosure, filed with the House Clerk's office, a public document available on the House website, your household assets were valued at approximately $51,000. According to your 2024 financial disclosure, filed 1 year later with the same office, your household assets were valued at between $6 million and $30 million. He let the numbers sit in the hearing room for 3 seconds. $51,000 to $30 million in 12 months. A 600-fold increase. On January 17th of this year, Elon Musk publicly characterized this wealth increase as fraudulent. The vice president. It isn't my job to endorse tweets. But I'll note that on February 6th of this year, 5 weeks ago, Chairman James Comer of the House Oversight Committee opened a formal investigation into companies linked to your husband, Tim Minett. Chairman Comer's letter to Mr. Minett states, and I am quoting from the letter, which is a public document, "We want to know who is funding this and who is buying access." End quote. The investigation is examining 2 of Minett's companies. The first is Estancia Crew LLC, a wine business that is currently object of a fraud lawsuit filed in Washington, D.C., by an investor named Naeem Mahmood, who alleges that Minett and his business partner misrepresented the company's financial health and failed to deliver promised profits. The second company is Rose Lake Capital. I also want to note something that's been reported by the Jerusalem Post and the Minnesota Reformer. Your husband is profiting from the sale of wine through a company he co-owns. You've publicly described your marriage as both Islamic and legal. Traditional Sunni Islam prohibits the sale and consumption of alcohol. I'm not questioning your religious practice. That is your private business. But when a member of Congress's household income depends on a business that directly contradicts her stated religious identity, the American people have a right to ask questions about consistency. Separately, and this is the part that connects to this committee's mandate, your campaign committee paid Minett's consulting firm, E Street Group LLC, approximately $3 million between 2018 and 2022. These payments are documented in 16 separate FEC quarterly filings filed under penalty of perjury. In August of 2019, Minett's then-wife, Dr. Beth Minett, filed for divorce in the District of Columbia Superior Court. In her sworn filing, she alleged that her husband had told her he was, quote, romantically involved with you, Congresswoman. She further alleged that his campaign travel was, quote, more related to his affair with Representative Omar than with his actual work commitments, end quote. $3 million of donor money to your romantic partner's consulting firm. A 600-fold wealth explosion in 12 months. A fraud lawsuit against your husband's wine company. And a formal oversight committee investigation opened 5 weeks ago by Chairman Comer. These are public records, Congresswoman. Not allegations, not opinions. Records. Where did the $30 million come from? Omar pivoted. She'd been trained to pivot. Mr. Vice President, let's talk about your donors. Let's talk about Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley billionaire who funded your entire Senate campaign. Let's talk about the venture capitalists who bankrolled your political career while you claimed to represent working people. Congresswoman, Vance didn't raise his voice. Every dollar Peter Thiel donated to my campaign is disclosed in my FEC filings. Every dollar. Itemized. Public. I've never had an FEC complaint filed against me. I've never been fined by a state campaign finance board, and my household wealth didn't increase 600-fold in 12 months. I answered your question in 4 sentences. Can you answer mine? Where did the $30 million come from? Omar didn't answer. Rand Paul spoke from the chairman's seat. Mr. Vice President, I want to supplement that exchange with a procedural note. As chairman of this committee, I've formally requested financial records from Mr. Minet's companies, Estancia Crew LLC and Rose Lake Capital. The deadline for compliance is April 15th. If the records aren't produced by that date, this committee will issue subpoenas. That isn't a political threat, Congresswoman. It's a legal process, and it applies to everyone equally, regardless of party, regardless of religion, regardless of which cable news network is covering the hearing. Congresswoman, I want to address one more factual matter before we move to the final section of this hearing. Vance's voice didn't change. It remained flat, precise, unhurried. The voice of a man who'd been trained, first by the Marine Corps and then by Yale Law School, to deliver difficult information without editorializing it. In 2016, during your first congressional campaign, allegations emerged that your second marriage to a man named Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi may have been connected to an immigration fraud scheme. These allegations were investigated by multiple journalists and by the Minnesota State Campaign Finance Board. The state investigator described what he found as, quote, substantial evidence of irregularities in the public records surrounding that marriage. The specific evidence in the public record includes shared address records between you and Elmi that predate the marriage and are consistent with a familial rather than a romantic relationship. Social media posts from members of your own family that appear to identify Elmi as a sibling, and tax filings from 2014 and 2015 in which you and Elmi filed jointly as married filing jointly, while you were simultaneously legally married to Ahmed Hirsi and living with him at a different address. The Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board investigated and fined you $650 for improperly filing joint tax returns with Elmi while married to Hirsi. That fine is a matter of public record. You've denied the allegations for 8 years. You've called them biased. You've called them anti-Muslim conspiracy. You've called them a right-wing setup. But in 8 years, you've never provided a point-by-point rebuttal of the public records I just cited. You've never released the marriage certificate. You've never provided documentary evidence that Elmi isn't your brother. You've never explained the joint tax filings. Congresswoman, which specific authority debunked these records? Name the authority. These allegations have been debunked repeatedly, Omar said. Her voice was quieter than it had been all morning. I won't dignify biased conspiracy theories with a response in this forum. Congresswoman, repeatedly, isn't an authority. Repeatedly is a frequency. I'm asking for a name, an institution, a report, a document, something with a letterhead and a date on it that I can verify on a public database. 8 seconds of silence. Congresswoman, I want to be fair to you. I understand that these allegations are personal and that they involve your family. I'm not asking you to discuss your private life. I'm asking you to identify the specific authority that reviewed the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board's findings, reviewed the shared address records, reviewed the social media posts, reviewed the joint tax filings, and concluded that the allegations were false. If such an authority exists, Naming it would end this line of questioning immediately. I'd accept the finding and move on. 12 seconds of silence. I'm giving you the opportunity to end this, Congresswoman. Name the authority. Omar looked at Tlaib. Tlaib was looking at the table. Omar looked at Rosen. Rosen was looking at her notes. Omar looked at the cameras. The cameras were looking at her. She didn't name an authority. She couldn't name an authority because in 8 years of repeating the word debunked in interviews, press conferences, town halls, and cable news appearances, no one had ever pressed her on live television with the cameras rolling, with the Vice President of the United States sitting 12 feet away, to name the specific authority that had conducted the debunking. The record will show that the Congresswoman was asked 3 separate times to identify the debunking authority and declined to provide one. 8 years. 0 sources. 3 direct requests in this hearing. 0 names provided. 8 years debunked repeatedly. 0 sources. Not one authority named. The Vice President just asked for a name and got silence. Comment. Name the source if you think that silence tells you everything. Because what happens next is the moment Ilhan Omar's own party turns on her. One more matter for the record, Congresswoman. I want to discuss your history with the House of Representatives, specifically your removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee. In February of 2019, you posted a tweet stating that American political support for Israel was, and I am quoting your exact words, all about the Benjamin's baby. The tweet referenced the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee and invoked a well-documented discriminatory trope, the claim that Jewish people purchase political influence with money. The response wasn't partisan, it was bipartisan. Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, the 2 highest-ranking members of your own Democratic Party at the time, issued a joint statement condemning your remarks. Their statement read, quote, "Discrimination must be called out, confronted and condemned whenever it's encountered, without exception." End quote. That was your own party. In 2019 and in 2012, before you entered Congress, you tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world. That's another documented discriminatory trope. You later said you didn't understand at the time that the tweet invoked discriminatory imagery. In an interview with CNN, you stated, quote, "I wasn't aware of the fact that there are tropes about Jews and money." End quote. In 2021, you compared the United States and Israel to violent extremist groups. 12 House Democrats, members of your own party, publicly rebuked you in a joint statement. And in February of 2023, the United States House of Representatives voted 218 to 211 to remove you from the Foreign Affairs Committee. The resolution stated that you quote, brought dishonor to the House of Representatives, end quote. Congresswoman, you were removed from a congressional committee by a vote of the full House of Representatives for discriminatory statements made repeatedly over a period of years, condemned by your own party's leadership. And then you walked into this hearing room today and called every question about your record biased. He looked at her directly. The person in this hearing room who's been formally sanctioned for bigotry, Congresswoman, isn't me. It is you. And then Jackie Rosen spoke. Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada was 67 years old. She was Jewish. She was a Democrat. She'd been silent for the entire hearing, watching, listening, calculating. She'd watched Omar's opening attack. She'd watched Vance's methodical response. She'd watched Tim Scott's intervention. She'd watched the brother question go unanswered. And she'd been waiting for this moment, because this moment was the reason she'd come to the hearing. She leaned forward to her microphone. Mr. Chairman, I want to make a statement for the record, as a Jewish American and as a Democrat. Every Democrat in the hearing room held their breath. The vice president has cited Congresswoman Omar's documented history of discriminatory comments. I want to be clear about something that I think matters more than any political calculation I could make today. In 2019, when Congresswoman Omar made the Benjamins comment, I co-sponsored the House resolution condemning discrimination. I did so as a Democrat. I did so as a Jew. I did so because discrimination isn't a partisan issue. It's a moral issue that transcends party loyalty. She paused, looked at Omar, and looked back at the camera. I also want to state for the record that the Feeding Our Future investigation involves $250 million of stolen federal funds, money that was supposed to feed children. This committee has a responsibility to investigate that theft, regardless of whose district it occurred in, regardless of whose donors are implicated, and regardless of who is uncomfortable with the investigation. Congresswoman Omar, I've defended you publicly against what I believed were unfair attacks over the years. I defended you on the floor of the House when Republicans moved to remove you from the Foreign Affairs Committee. I did so because I believed at the time that the removal was politically motivated. I want to be transparent about that history, because what I'm about to say will be difficult for both of us. I can defend silence when legitimate questions are asked about public records. I can defend a 600-fold wealth increase that hasn't been explained. I can defend campaign donations from individuals convicted of stealing children's food money. And I can defend the use of the word biased to avoid answering questions about campaign finance. That cheapens the word Congresswoman. It cheapens the word biased in a way that harms every community that actually experiences prejudice. And as a Jewish American who's experienced real discrimination, including, Congresswoman, from your own public statements in 2019 and 2012 and 2021, I take the cheapening of that word personally. Because when every question is biased, no question is biased. And that helps no one, least of all the communities you claim to protect. The hearing room went very still. A Jewish Democrat had just publicly broken with a Muslim colleague, not on policy, not on party strategy, but on the fundamental question of whether calling every question biased was an acceptable substitute for answering it. Rosen hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't been theatrical. She'd been precise, personal, and devastating, in the particular way that only a colleague's betrayal can be devastating. Because colleagues know where the wounds are. Several Democratic staffers in the back of the room looked at each other. One of them closed her laptop. The hearing had crossed a line that no one in the room had expected it to cross, and the line had been crossed not by a Republican, but by a Democrat. Omar turned to Rosen. Her voice was sharp, but there was something underneath the sharpness that hadn't been there before. Something that sounded, for the first time all morning, like genuine surprise. Senator Rosen, are you serious right now? You siding with Trump's vice president, against a fellow Democrat, against a Muslim woman who's been targeted by this administration from the day she took office? Rosen didn't flinch. I'm siding with the $250 million that was supposed to feed children. Congresswoman, that money doesn't have a party. And those children don't have a lobbyist. They don't have a consulting firm. They don't have a 600-fold wealth increase. They have empty lunch trays. And this committee owes them answers, regardless of who is uncomfortable providing them. Omar stared at her for 3 seconds. She had no response. The phrase empty lunch trays sat in the hearing room like a verdict that had already been delivered. You just watched a Jewish Democrat publicly break with Ilhan Omar on the record, on live C-SPAN, over discrimination and $250 million of stolen children's food money. Omar's own party just turned on her. Comment: follow the money if you think the children who were supposed to eat those meals deserve answers. Because what comes next is Omar's last chance to fight back. Ilhan Omar stood up. She'd been sitting for 43 minutes, absorbing blows, absorbing questions, absorbing Tim Scott's accounting lecture, absorbing Jackie Rosen's rebuke, absorbing the silence that followed every unanswered question. Now she stood, because standing was what she did when she had nothing left, except the force of her own voice. Mr. Vice President, since you want to discuss records, let me discuss yours. Her hands were moving again. The defensive choreography had returned. You called Donald Trump America's notorious dictator in 2016. Your exact words, not a paraphrase, not taken out of context. You typed them in a private message to a friend. And when the message was leaked, you confirmed it was authentic. America's dictator. And then you spent the next 8 years transforming yourself from Trump's most articulate critic into Trump's vice president. That isn't a political evolution, Mr. Vice President. That's a character study in ambition without principle. You said on national television, on Tucker Carlson's show in 2021, that women without children are, quote, childless cat ladies who have, quote, no direct stake in the future of this country. You insulted millions of American women, women who are childless by choice, women who are childless because of infertility, women who are childless because of cancer treatment, women who are childless because life didn't go the way they planned. You dismissed their citizenship, their stake in America, because they didn't reproduce on your schedule. You were a venture capitalist for Peter Thiel in San Francisco, in the same Silicon Valley you now attack in your speeches. Peter Thiel, a tech billionaire worth approximately $10 billion, a man who funded a surveillance company called Palantir that has government contracts to track immigrants. That is the man who bankrolled your Senate campaign with $10 million. You didn't run for Senate because the people of Ohio asked you to, Mr. Vice President. You ran because a billionaire who profits from surveilling immigrants decided that electing a senator was a good return on investment. Your book, Hillbilly Elegy, the book that made you famous, the book that Hollywood turned into a Netflix movie, blamed poor people for their own poverty. You wrote, and I am quoting directly from page 174. We talk about the value of hard work, but tell ourselves that the reason we're not working is some perceived unfairness. You blamed the workers, Mr. Vice President, not the corporations that shipped their jobs to China, not the pharmaceutical companies that flooded their communities with highly addictive prescriptions until the life expectancy in your home county dropped below the national average, not the hedge funds that bought their factories and stripped them for parts, the workers. And you, a man who changed his name 3 times, changed his party loyalty once, changed his position on Donald Trump 180 degrees, and changed his career from venture capital to populism when the polling told him to. Do you have the audacity to sit across from a refugee who's held the same principles for her entire public life, and question my integrity? Tlaib applauded. 2 Democratic staffers stood briefly. For 20 seconds, the hearing room's momentum shifted. Omar had landed real punches. The dictator quote was devastating because it was real and unambiguous. The childless cat lady's quote was devastating because it had hurt real people. The Peter Thiel funding was devastating because it contradicted Vance's working-class brand. And the Hillbilly Elegy quote was devastating because many of the people watching at home had read the book and remembered the passage. For 20 seconds, the room belonged to Ilhan Omar. It was the strongest moment she'd have for the rest of the hearing. Vance waited for the noise to settle. When it did, his voice was exactly as flat as it had been at the beginning of the hearing. Congresswoman, I'll address your 4 points. I've publicly said I was wrong on the record, multiple times, including during my vice presidential debate with Governor Walz on national television. I changed my mind about Donald Trump after seeing his policies in action. Americans are allowed to change their minds. I've been honest about the change. I've never pretended those words don't exist. Two childless cat ladies. A bad joke in a bad interview. I've apologized for the phrasing. I stand by the policy point underneath it, which is that family formation matters to the future of the country. You can disagree with the policy. You can pretend I haven't to address the quote, because I have, publicly, repeatedly, and on the record. 3. Peter Thiel. Every dollar he donated is disclosed in my FEC filings. Every dollar from every donor I've ever received is disclosed. Itemized. Public. Verifiable at fec.gov. I've never had an FEC complaint filed against me. I've never been fined by a state campaign finance board. I've never had a formal oversight committee investigation opened into my family's finances, and my household wealth didn't increase 600-fold in 12 months. You mentioned that Thiel donated $10 million to my campaign. That number is approximately correct. It's also disclosed, public, and legal. Can you say the same about the money your donors gave you, Congresswoman? Because $10 million from a disclosed, legal, publicly named donor isn't the same as campaign donations from individuals convicted of stealing children's food money. 4. Hillbilly Elegy. The book is a memoir about my family, my mother's substance struggles, my grandmother's sacrifice, the collapse of the manufacturing economy in southwestern Ohio. You quoted one sentence from page 174 out of 264 pages. The same book describes the opioid companies that destroyed my hometown. It describes the Armco steel plant closing that eliminated the middle class in Middletown. It describes what happens when every institution, government, corporate, cultural, fails a community at the same time. I wrote the book because I believed the full story needed to be told, including the parts that were uncomfortable for people who looked like me and lived like me. The book has sold over 3 million copies. Millions of working-class Americans have read it and recognized their own families in it. You can disagree with my conclusions. You can pretend the book says something it doesn't say. He paused. Congresswoman, you've now attacked my record 4 times. I've answered all 4 attacks with specific, verifiable facts and public statements. Every answer I gave can be checked by any viewer watching at home. The retraction is on the record. The apology is on the record. The Peter Thiel donations are on fec.gov. The Hillbilly Elegy text is on page 174 of a book that sold 3 million copies. You've been asked 5 questions about your own record during this hearing. The Feeding Our Future donations. The $30 million wealth increase. The $3 million to your husband's consulting firm. The marriage to Ahmed Noor, Saeed Elmi, and the debunking authority that doesn't exist. And the discriminatory statements that led to your removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee by a vote of the full House of Representatives. You've answered 0 of those 5 questions. 0. The ratio, Congresswoman, is 4-0. I've answered 4 attacks. You've answered 0 questions. And the American people watching at home, the truck drivers, and the nurses, and the teachers, and the electricians, who don't have Yale law degrees, or congressional salaries, or 600-fold wealth increases, the American people can count, and they're recounting right now. Congresswoman, I want to close briefly, because the facts are on the record, and the American people are capable of drawing their own conclusions without me telling them what to think. In 7 years in Congress, you've been removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee by a vote of the full House of Representatives for discriminatory comments. You've been fined by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board for improper tax filings. Your campaign has paid your husband as consulting firm $3 million. A husband whose ex-wife alleged under oath that his travel was a cover for an affair. Your household wealth has exploded from $51,000 to as much as $30 million in 12 months. And a formal oversight committee investigation is examining the source of that wealth. Your campaign received donations from individuals convicted of stealing $250 million from children's food programs, and you've been asked for 8 years to explain the public records surrounding your marriage to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi, and for 8 years your only answer has been debunked, without naming a single debunking authority. In response to every one of these questions today, and for the past 8 years, you've said the same word, biased. Congresswoman, I am married to an Indian-American woman. Senator Scott is a black man from South Carolina. Senator Rosen, a member of your own party, is a Jewish woman from Nevada who just told you on the record that she can't defend your silence. The people asking you questions in this hearing room include a Marine veteran, a black senator, a Jewish Democrat, and the chairman of this committee. We aren't an extremist group. Congresswoman, we read the United States Senate, and the United States Senate is asking you to answer questions about public records that bear your own name. And Congresswoman, I want to say one more thing before I close, because what happened in this hearing today isn't just about you. It's a pattern. And the pattern is what I think the American people need to see. For the last decade, a specific group of politicians in your party has adopted a specific strategy for avoiding accountability. The strategy is simple. When a Republican asks about public records, call the question biased. When a senator asks about campaign finance, call the question anti-Muslim setup. When a committee chairman issues a subpoena, call the subpoena radical extremism. When a journalist writes a story, call the journalist a bigot. The strategy works for a while. It works because the accusation of bias is so serious in American public life that most people would rather drop the question than risk being called prejudiced for asking it. And that is what you've accounted on for 8 years, Congresswoman. You've accounted on the decency of the people asking the questions. You've weaponized their decency against them. But decency has a limit. And I think today, with Senator Rosen's statement, with Senator Scott's statement, with the public records on the table, we've reached that limit. The American people watching this hearing at home aren't biased, Congresswoman. They read truck drivers and nurses and electricians and teachers and small business owners who pay their taxes on time, because if they don't, the IRS won't accept bias as a defense. They file their financial disclosures on time, because if they don't, they lose their professional licenses. They follow the rules, because the rules are the only thing standing between them and ruin. And they rewatching you right now, on C-SPAN, refuse to answer 5 questions about your own public records, and they wondering what every American wonders when a politician won't answer a question, what is she hiding? I don't know what you're hiding, Congresswoman. That isn't my accusation. And the American people deserve better from a member of the United States Congress. You've chosen not to answer. He looked at her for 2 seconds. The American people will decide what that silence means. I don't need to tell them. They already know. And then Ilhan Omar began to speak, and her voice broke. Not loudly, not theatrically. The sharp cadence that had carried her through 8 years of congressional confrontations, the cadence that had turned impeach him into a rallying cry, that had made All About the Benjamins into a viral moment, that had powered 1,000 campaign speeches, and 100 cable news appearances, and 50 committee hearing interruptions. That cadence cracked. This hearing is, she stopped, started again. This hearing has been, she stopped again. The sentence she was constructing didn't have an ending she was willing to say out loud. For the first time in her congressional career, in front of a live C-SPAN audience, in front of the Vice President of the United States, in front of a Jewish Democrat who just abandoned her, in front of a black Republican who'd told her that accounting doesn't have a race, Ilhan Omar started a sentence she couldn't finish. The cameras caught it. The unfinished sentence, the pause, the moment when the cadence that had built an entire political career simply stopped working. "I yield," she said finally. 2 words. The shortest statement she'd made in any hearing in 7 years. Vance spoke his last line. "I yield my time, Mr. Chairman." 7 words. The desk was still empty. Rand Paul gave the hearing closed. Based on the public records and testimony presented today, the committee will refer the matters discussed to the Department of Justice, the House Ethics Committee, and the House Oversight Committee for further review. The committee notes Senator Rosen's statement regarding bipartisan investigative intent. This hearing stands adjourned. The gavel fell. Rashida Tlaib left first. She gathered her papers without looking at Omar, walked out through the main doors, and was on her phone before she reached the hallway. The reporters waiting outside got the back of her head. Jackie Rosen left second. She gathered her notes slowly, the way senators gather notes when they know the cameras are still on. She walked past Omar's seat. She stopped. She leaned down and said something quietly. 5 words, too soft for the microphones, but clearly and slowly enough that 3 lip readers, hired by 3 different news networks, would later agree on what she said. "Ilhan, answer the questions, please." Omar didn't respond. Rosen straightened up and walked out. Ilhan Omar was the last person on the Democratic side to leave. She sat at the witness table for 90 seconds after the gavel. The C-SPAN cameras were still rolling. They captured her sitting alone, hands flat on the table, staring at the empty chair where Jackie Rosen had been sitting. After 90 seconds, she stood. She picked up her manila folder. She walked to the side door of the hearing room. Not the main door where the reporters waited with cameras and microphones. The side door, the staff door, the quiet door. It closed behind her without a sound. Tim Scott walked over to Vance and shook his hand. "Mr. Vice President, thank you." Tim. The accounting line was the one that mattered. Accounting doesn't have a race. It needed to be said. It did. Rand Paul nodded from the chairman's seat, the brief nod of a surgeon who'd watched a colleague perform a clean procedure. Vance stood up. He picked up nothing from his desk, because there was nothing on his desk. He straightened his jacket, walked out through the main doors, past the cameras, past the questions, past the reporters shouting his name. He didn't stop. He didn't comment. The Vice President of the United States walked to the elevator at the end of the hall, and the doors closed, and he went back to work. J.D. Vance walked into the Vice President's residence at 7:45 that evening. Usha was at the kitchen table helping their daughter with homework. Their youngest was already asleep upstairs. Usha looked up. "I watched. And you didn't bring any notes." "Didn't need them." "I know. That's what made it work." He sat down at the table, helped his daughter with homework for 20 minutes, didn't check his phone, didn't look at the view count. The clip was at 43 million and climbing, but the Vice President of the United States was reviewing multiplication tables with a 7-year-old, because that's what Tuesday evenings looked like at number 1 Observatory Circle when the hearing was over, and the cameras were off, and the only thing left to do was be a father. Somewhere in Minneapolis, a congresswoman was drafting a press release that would call the hearing a biased spectacle. Orchestrated by Trump's political machine, the press release would get 14,000 retweets by morning. The hearing clip would pass 50 million views by midnight, and at number 1 Observatory Circle, the man who'd memorized an entire career's worth of FEC filings without writing a single one down, was sitting at a kitchen table with his family, because some things don't require notes. And the most important things in both categories have nothing to do with politics. The desk had been empty. The desk had always been the point. If you made it this far, you just watched the Vice President of the United States dismantle a sitting Congresswoman's entire record using nothing but memorized public records and an empty desk. You watched a black Republican from South Carolina tell her that biased isn't a substitute for accountable. You watched a Jewish Democrat tell her own colleague to answer the questions, and you watched Ilhan Omar start a sentence she couldn't finish for the first time in her congressional career. Smash that like button if you believe public records matter more than press releases. Subscribe, because more stories are coming. Comment empty desk if you think every politician should have to answer questions without notes and without excuses. And share this with everyone who's ever watched a politician call a question biased instead of answering it, because the $250 million that was supposed to feed children doesn't have a party, and the children who were supposed to eat those meals are still waiting for someone to explain where the money went. The desk was empty. The answers were